The plate shattered like a gunshot, and every head in the diner twitched, startled, then quickly looked away. But Lucas saw only his daughter's small fingers tightening around his sleeve, the way a storm makes a child reach for the nearest anchor. "Daddy, can we help her?" she whispered, eyes fixed on the corner where a woman stood, shaking, two men closing in like closing doors. "Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from." It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. 1. The Diner and the Promise Marigold Diner sat on the corner of Cedar and Fifth, where everyone in Seabrook ended up eventually. After funerals, after fishing shifts, after the kind of bad news that makes you need coffee even at midnight. Lucas had a habit of finding the same booth whenever he took his daughter, Willa, out for pancakes on Fridays. The red vinyl had a tear in the corner. Someone had scratched a daisy into the table with a key. It made the place feel lived in, like a room in a house that keeps the smell of warm syrup no matter the season. Lucas was 36 and built like a man used to lifting more than he meant to. His hands were thick and careful. He was a carpenter by trade and a single father by design, though the design wasn't his. Willa was 7 and kept a small notebook of animals that don't live here: giraffes, elephants, desert foxes, and a collection of stickers like tiny flags she offered to sad strangers. They'd been talking about albatrosses, how they could fly for days without landing when the woman arrived. She slipped through the door like someone who'd already walked too far. Her coat was 3 seasons out of date, deep green. It made her skin look pale as paper. She took a stool at the counter with her back to the wall. Not a local, Lucas thought. Her eyes didn't rest anywhere, just scanned, returned, scanned again. When the two men walked in, the air shifted. Even before the plate broke, Lucas felt it, a ripple of attention like the moment before a fight at a high school basketball game. One man had a jaw that had been set too hard and never relaxed. The other was thin and jittery, as if the inside of him was always louder than the outside. They wore jackets with a company logo, Grayline Logistics. Any sailor could tell you a logo doesn't mean a man is safe. They didn't start with words. They started with nearness. They took stools beside the woman without asking and then leaned so close she had to fold her arms to create space. A burner noise of conversation rose in the diner, people talking louder so they wouldn't hear what they knew was happening. The waitress, me, flashed a look at the cook, then at the phone. The cook's hand hovered over it, unsure. The woman said something too soft to catch. The thin man chuckled. It wasn't humor. The one with the hard jaws hand came down on the counter, a thick sound. It knocked a plate to the floor. The shatter cut through the chatter, made a quiet that felt like held breath. Willa's hand found Lucas's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, eyes far older than 7 in that moment. "Can we help her?" Lucas had rules he'd built since the day he'd become 2 people in one body, himself and the father. Rules like scan the exits. Rules like don't be a hero, heroes don't raise their kids. Rules like pick your moment and make it count. He slid out of the booth, his voice quiet and clear. "Me, could you bring us the check?" He said it loud enough to be heard. He wanted everyone to know he was not sneaking. He turned to Willa. "Sweetheart, go sit behind the counter with me. Hang on to your backpack, just like we practiced." They had practiced. Tornado drills, fire drills, the little rituals of safety that make fear less of a surprise. Willa slid off the bench, small sneakers whispering on tile, and moved fast to the counter. She looked back only once, book clutched to her chest. Lucas approached the counter the way he approached a table saw, steady, with respect for what could go wrong. He caught the woman's eyes for a fraction of a second, a light green rimmed in darker, then looked at the men. "Evening, fellas," Lucas said. Voice even, shoulders open, palms visible. "Everything okay here?" The hard-jaw one didn't look at him at first, as if refusing would make him disappear. When he finally did, it was with the flat look of a man annoyed by an inconvenience, the way you might look at rain on the day you plan to paint your deck. "This is between us," he said. "Take your kid and eat your pancakes." The thin one smiled without it reaching anywhere. "Friendly town, huh?" he said, voice high with something like amusement. He tapped the Grayline logo on his chest with 2 fingernails. "Mind your own business, friend." Lucas kept his eyes on their hands. He mapped the space inside himself, the reach of his arms, the distance to the woman, where the counter could support weight if things went sideways. "I am," he said. "You're both touching someone who doesn't want to be touched. That's my business in this town." The woman made a small sound, not a sob, more like a note squeezed out of a violin, and Lucas felt something loosen inside his chest. She was holding herself too still, like someone trying not to spill. The hard jaw guy's hand moved toward her forearm, a possession more than a grip. Lucas stepped between them, a shift that put his body where hers had been, close but not touching. The younger, thin one leaned forward, his lips moving. Back off. Mi's voice came from somewhere behind Lucas. Cops are on the way, she said, and for a second he loved her for it. Hardjaw laughed. Cops, he said. Sheriff's already on our company's payroll. Seabrook was the kind of town where everybody knew how true a lie could be if you said it with the right mouth. Lucas smiled like he wasn't impressed. Let's go outside, Lucas offered. Talk like neighbors. Hardjaw's eyes shifted toward Lucas's left shoulder. A tell. Lucas moved before the other man did. Not a big move, he stepped in and turned his body so the Hardjaw's hand glanced off his ribs instead of his face. Then he caught the wrist and anchored it against the counter, fingers closing enough to say I'm not kidding but not enough to bruise. The thin guy swore and stood, the stool legs screeching. Easy, Lucas said, soft but iron. We're all being watched. The room was awash in silence and the clink of cutlery no one was using. The cook's eyes were wide. Someone breathed out too loud in a far booth. The woman had moved an inch back, that's all, but the space was air again. Then the door jingled and Sheriff Alton stepped in 50, mustache that said he'd chosen it and stuck with it. He looked at the room and sighed. What I miss? He asked, but he'd already clocked Hardjaw's wrist in Lucas's hand and the woman pressed back against the wall like someone trying to be part of it. It was just a misunderstanding, Hardjaw said. His voice was slick with practiced innocence. Friend here mistook us for somebody else. Alton's eyes moved from face to face. Lucas could feel a choice being made in how long they lingered on the Greyline logo, on the woman's eyes, on Willa's small head just visible behind the counter. Maybe it is, the sheriff said. Why don't we cool off, chaps, step outside. Let the lady have her breakfast in peace. I don't want anything from them, the woman said, voice small but clear. First words, I told you that. Hardjaw's eyes cut toward her, and Lucas felt it in his own bones, that brittle old anger of the unaccustomed no. He tightened his grip once more to say you will not. A minute was a long time, but it passed. Hardjaw jerked his wrist, but Lucas released him before he could say he'd been let go. The men backed away, their swagger now a little too deliberate, like they were enacting the idea of leaving more than actually leaving. The thin one made a gesture toward his temple at Lucas, a little gun with his fingers, and smirked. Alton bristled. Enough, he said. Move it along. They left. The bell above the door jingled like a laugh. Mi exhaled so hard her hair swayed. The cook said, Jesus. Someone clapped once, the sound immediately stifled by embarrassment. Willa climbed out from behind the counter and ran to Lucas the way kids do when they don't want to run. They try to walk fast, but their feet forget how. Lucas crouched to her level. You okay? She nodded, chin wobbling. Can we give her a sticker? She asked. He looked up at the woman. She was leaning on the counter now, both hands flat like the world had tilted and she'd steadied it herself. She was staring at the door as if it might divide itself and reassemble. Hey, Lucas said, voice quiet, softer than he'd been with the men. You all right? She looked at him then, and he could see the way her face was built, for steadiness, for thought. I don't know, she said. Thank you, I'm Lucas, he said. He didn't add last names. Names felt like currency now. This is Willa. Her mouth moved like it was remembering the shape of a smile. Iris, she said. I'm Iris. Willa approached, holding her little booklet. Do you want a sticker? She asked. I have stars and space whales. Iris blinked like she hadn't been offered something in a long time. Space whales. They're just whales, Willa whispered conspiratorially, but in space. Iris took the sticker between forefinger and thumb, brushed Willa's knuckles with her nail by accident. Thank you, Willa, she said. Her voice was not yet steady, but that was all right. Nobody in the diner was steady. Alton made a show of scratching an incident into his notebook. He looked at Iris, and his questions had the look of crumbed bread. Do you want to press charges? He asked. Do you know them? Iris shook her head. I don't know them, she said, and the lie sat between them like a folded napkin. I don't want any more trouble. Trouble, it seems, doesn't ask, Alton said, quietly enough only Lucas heard. Iris glanced at Lucas, then away. I have to go. Let me call you a cab, Mi offered. No, Iris said. She tucked the space whale into her coat pocket like a relic and left. Lucas watched her walk out into the noon glare. He watched the street swallow her. Willa tugged his sleeve. Daddy, she said, in a voice that had learned how to be careful, are we going to help her? He wished he could tell his daughter the world was binary, that there were clean answers. He thought of all the times he'd chosen the quiet option to keep the two-person life safe. He nodded, gentle. "We already did," he said, "but maybe that's not the end." He didn't know then how true that was. He didn't know the next day would put him back in the same story, deeper than he knew his feet could go. 2. The quiet before the knock. The afternoon was a ritual. Workbench, cedar dust, the smell of lemon oil on old wood. Lucas's shop sat 2 blocks from the diner, a brick rectangle with a roll-up door and windows that collected moths at night. He built things to be leaned on, tables that forgave the weight of elbows, chairs that did not wobble, hope chests that understood grief. There was work in the corner waiting for him, a walnut dresser for a woman who'd saved for months, a cradle he didn't let himself think about too much because he always wanted to check the joints twice. Willa sat cross-legged near the workbench, building a fort out of offcuts. "Should we paint it?" she asked. "Fort Whale." "We could," Lucas said. He measured, cut, sanded in even strokes, the rhythm returning his breath. He was sweeping up when he saw the shape at the bay door, just a shadow that didn't move. The hairs on his forearms rose before his mind made the connection. He straightened and saw Iris standing just outside, hands folded, the green coat now making her look like an early leaf. She didn't step over the threshold until he nodded. Then she crossed into the warm smell and looked around as if memory might be hiding between the clamp and the chalk line. "I'm sorry," she said, and that was the last thing he expected her to be. "I shouldn't have come, but I didn't know where else to." She stopped. The look in her eyes had graduated from fear to purpose. Something in that progression made Lucas more alert than he'd been when the men climbed on either side of her at the counter. "Do you want water?" he asked. She nodded. Willa was looking from the fort to Iris like a sparrow trying to figure out if a gull was a friend. Iris took the paper cup with both hands like a bowl. "I owe you an explanation," she said after 2 swallows. "But I should also probably leave. They're looking for me." "I figured," Lucas said. He glanced at Willa, who had resumed painting her fort with invisible paint. "Who are they?" "They work out of Greyline," she said. "Security." She said the last word with a private humor, the kind that makes a person sound closer to themselves. "One of them, Cole, he's not. He's not the type you say no to, not if you want your car to still have tires in the morning. The other one, Dax, he's a kid someone forgot to teach fear." "What do they want?" Lucas asked. He kept his voice level, but he was already inventorying his shop for what could be used to block a door. Iris pulled a small object from her coat pocket. Not the sticker, that was tucked somewhere safe, but something black and thin, a piece of metal with a LED that blinked at the corner. She set it on the bench and it looked like a beetle. "I took something," she said. "Something they don't want outside their walls. It's an export manifest, but not the kind you send to the Port Authority. It's code that doesn't act like code is supposed to. I worked in their data room. I noticed patterns, things nobody noticed because they were busy believing the version on the top, but if you peel enough top away, you get something rotten," Lucas finished. She nodded. "Something that got my brother killed," she said, and the words were a rock in the river of the conversation. It split around them. Lucas leaned back, the broom balanced against his shoulder like a staff. He'd learned over the years that grief never enters a room and sits alone. It always brings its friends, anger, blame, longing, and they all want attention. "I'm sorry," he said. He didn't have to. She didn't finish. Sometimes the sentence that follows that word is heavier than language can carry. She swallowed. "After he died, I wanted 2 things, for it to matter and to stop hurting. I could do almost nothing about the second one and almost everything about the first if I was willing to be stupid. So I took this." She tapped the drive, "and tried to give it to someone who could make it matter." "The diner," Lucas said. "You were meeting someone." "A reporter from the city," Iris said. "He texted on the way that he thought he was being followed, told me to leave it taped under the napkin holder. So I did, but when your daughter offered me a sticker, I felt seen. I forgot to look away, and then they were there." Lucas's skin prickled. "Do you think they saw you tape it?" "I think they were there to see who would choose the napkin holder in a room full of napkin holders," she said. "I think they saw enough to know I'm not a rumor." Willa emerged, hair streaked with sawdust, and looked at the drive on the bench. "Is that a remote?" she asked. "What does it turn on?" "A lot," Iris said, and her smile made her eyes soft for a moment. "But not the things we want." She looked at Lucas. "I shouldn't be here. I don't want to paint a target on you." "You don't paint targets," Willa said very seriously. "You draw them with chalk." Iris looked at the small person who had offered her a tiny galaxy and felt herself lose some old mooring she'd been tied to too long. She spoke half to Lucas, half to the air. I dreamed last night that I was a piece of string someone was pulling through a wall. Longer than I thought I was. Then I woke up and I was still small. I came here because you had the courage to stand up while everyone else was practicing how to sit down. And because your daughter's eyes said the thing I stopped letting myself say a long time ago. Can we help? It's a foolish question, or it's the only one worth anything. Lucas had the wild thought he should laugh because the moment had gotten too heavy for midday, but he didn't. He looked at Iris and her leaf-green coat and the small blinking beetle on his bench, then at Willa's fort. You can sit here a while, Lucas said. I locked the door at 5, it's 2 now. That buys you 3 hours of not being out there. Daddy, Willa said, we could take her to the cabin. Lucas's stomach dipped. The cabin lived on a shelf in his mind labeled winter. It had been his parents, then his, in that way rural things passed down like kitchens passed down recipes. It was an hour out, a short ride from where the river widened into a lake. He took Willa there sometimes when the weather was wrong in their skin and they needed to touch trees. It's not a bad idea, he said slowly, then to Iris. Is there someone you trust? We can help get you to them. She made a face like he'd suggested something both kind and impossible. Trust feels like a coat I left in another season, she said. There was a time, not now, she looked at the drive. If I can get this to the reporter, if I can send it somehow not from a phone, maybe I can make it matter. Maybe then I can go back to being nobody. It was the way she said go back that told Lucas she'd never been nobody. He decided to say yes to something he would have said no to yesterday. Iris, he said, we can drive out there this evening. There's a neighbor with a Wi-Fi that reaches if you stand on the porch and hold your hand up. It's ridiculous, but it works. You can send your, whatever a beetle sends, then we can figure out the next right thing. Iris looked at him for a long breath. Something warm moved across her face like the sun had found a break in clouds. Okay, she said. I'll pay you back for the gas. Lucas shook his head. We'll charge you in pancakes, he said. It was a weak joke, but it made Willa grin, which had the effect of making the room feel slightly more possible. They didn't see the truck idling across the street with 2 men inside, the way some stories start new chapters with the same nouns rearranged. 3. The road out they left in the gold light that made the edges of things seem kinder. Lucas loaded a small bag and Willa's backpack and a cooler into the back of the truck. Iris climbed in the passenger seat like someone trying on a roll, a traveler, a friend, a person safe to look out of the window. Willa buckled in behind, hugging Fort Whale. Playlist? Willa asked. Surprise me, Lucas said, and the first notes of a song his wife had loved bloomed, then faded. He let it be. Grief isn't a light you switch off, it's a room you learn to leave. The road out to the cabin curved through a forest that performed October in September and September in July, always slightly out of time. They passed the wide field where deer decided mornings, the small church that doubled as a polling place and a bake sale machine, the sign that said don't feed the bears in a font that looked like it had been cut from a newspaper in 1973. You don't ask, Iris said after a while. About my brother. If you want to tell me, you will, Lucas said. He tapped the top of the steering wheel with his ring finger, a soft rhythm. If you don't, that's all right. I want to, she said, and surprised herself with how true it felt. He was 3 years younger. Rylan. He laughed like a door that can't shut. He could fix anything with a battery. He didn't ever learn how to be bored. He turned boredom into shapes with music. Then he made a mistake that had too many shapes in it, and a pill that wasn't a pill, and a night that was longer than any night has a right to be. Greyline runs trucks that carry good things and also the kind that kill my brother. Lucas listened the way a carpenter listens to wood when the saw catches. Slow down, don't fight it. My wife, he said quietly after a mile. Her name was Miranda. She laughed like she believed laughter could keep you warm. Willa sees her sometimes in the angle the sunlight gets in the kitchen, the kind that makes dust look like glitter. She was here and then she wasn't, and people brought casseroles like they were currency, and I learned to cut the world into days and live just the one I had. They were quiet after that. Maybe they were thinking of how the world takes and then sometimes returns a thing that isn't the same shape, but fits anyway. You're better at pancakes than jokes, Iris observed eventually. That's what all the reviews on my life say, he answered. They turned down the dirt road that threaded through pines like a pathway to a secret. The cabin appeared the way old friends do, surprising and completely expected. The porch sagged like an exhausted brow. The windows blinked owlishly. Willa ran ahead, key in her palm like a talisman. Inside, the air was like cool and smelled of cedar and last winter's fire. Lucas opened the windows. Iris stood in the doorway like a person at a museum who has just realized all the paintings are of her. It's not much, Lucas said, immediately wishing he had left the explanation on the road. It was enough. Enough is not nothing. It's intention, Iris said, touching the back of a chair. That's rare. She took the drive from her coat and set it on the low table. Willa went straight to the bookshelf and pulled down 3 books about birds, as if the universe had arranged itself just so, anticipating her. Let's see if Eugene left his router on, Lucas said, then laughed at how 21st century the next part of the story was. He stepped onto the porch and held his phone up, then higher. 1 bar. He lifted his left arm like a conductor and the phone found the network. We're in. Iris smiled, a real one, cleaner than the edges of fear. Iris, promise not to make fun of your porch ballet, she said. If it sends your Beatle thing, I'll do a full performance, Lucas said. They sat on the floor near the door because that was where the connection was strongest. Iris plugged the drive into a foldable keyboard Lucas kept for invoices. Numbers and letters spilled across the dark screen like rain, then sorted themselves into neat grids. Willa leaned on Lucas's shoulder, watching the words. She didn't know their meanings, but she understood that a story was being told, and that is the skill grown-ups are always forgetting to practice. Iris typed in a string of characters that looked like music for a machine that understood nothing but obedience. Then she built a letter. Not long. Here is what I have. Here is what they do. Here is who they've hurt. Here is my name. Here is my condition. Protect the story, not me. She attached. She clicked send. The bar dropped to 0, then flickered back to 1, then rose to 2. The progress wheel turned. It didn't sing. It turned. It's going, she said, breath sitting on the word like a bird on a wire. Then the little ding. The message left them and entered the place messages go. They both exhaled like they had been holding the same breath for too long. Willa clapped as if a magic trick had been performed. Okay, Lucas said. Okay. They warmed soup on the stove. Iris laughed at something Willa said about owls having eyebrows and covered her mouth like she was shy of the sound. Lucas watched the way tension can exit a body in parts. Shoulders first, then the hands, then the voice. He had not realized how much he'd missed the company of someone his age who did not require him to carry their entire world. Night eased itself over the lake. Lucas lit the porch light. The world presented itself as ordinary, a cricket somewhere under the steps, a breeze, the smell of pine, and a hint of gasoline from the boat. He let himself believe for 20 minutes that the hardest part of the day was behind them. Then a branch snapped too near. He moved his daughter with a hand to her back, a pressure that said game but meant not. He turned off the porch light. Iris's face had already changed. It was a mirror of the one she wore in the diner. She nodded at the table. The drive was no longer on it. I put it in my boot, she said. Force of habit. Do you have a phone? Lucas asked. She shook her head. I tossed it in a mailbox 15 blocks from your shop. Neighbors? Lucas asked. His mind skimmed over a map. There were 3 within a quarter mile. Eugene, a retired math teacher with a Labrador who barked at meteor showers. Mr. and Mrs. Franklin, whose porch light had never burned out as far as Lucas could tell. And Ms. Cabrera, who fed coyotes against county policy and called them angels. Get Willa into the pantry, Lucas said to Iris. There's a bolt on the inside. You're not. I'm going to say hello to our guests, he said. He kept his voice easy because children soak up adult tempers like wood absorb stain. Willa's eyes were enormous, but she didn't cry. She had learned to interpret her father's face. She took Iris's hand. Iris squeezed it once, the kind of squeeze that says, I know something about fear that doesn't come from movies. They slipped down the small hall into the pantry, a closet that smelled of cinnamon and burlap and 3 winters of storing potatoes. Iris slid the bolt with a soft sound. Lucas breathed, counted 5, stepped onto the porch. The night was not an enemy. It was a texture. He let his eyes adjust. He could make out the shape of 2 men near the jagged line where the trees thickened, one tall, one heavy. They were talking not like spies, but like men who were annoyed their evening had been interrupted. Evening, Lucas called as if they were neighbors. You boys come for the bonfire. We're fresh out of marshmallows. The heavy one, Cole, took a step forward, gravel grinding under his boot. We had a feeling you'd be the helpful type, he said. Even helpful men can be taught not to meddle. Good luck, Lucas said. Teaching is hard work, underpaid. The thin one Dax laughed, but this time it sounded less like a sound effect and more like nervousness. He pointed at the cabin with his chin. We need what she took, he said. We don't want the kid. You can walk away from hero school if you want. Most drop out. Lucas held the doorframe. What you want and what you get, he said, aren't overlapping circles tonight. Cole took another step. He had a bat. Lucas hadn't noticed it until the moonlight caught it. He didn't lift it, just let it hang like a promise. Sheriff know you're out here? Lucas asked. I'd hate to have to call him, given all the paperwork. Dax clicked his tongue. Paperwork's nothing compared to what a man like Cole can do to a man like you if he feels disrespected. Is that right? Lucas said. He wasn't going to argue circles with a boy who wore menace like a new jacket. Not tonight. He reached down without looking and clicked the car alarm. The truck screamed once, then again, a sound that ricocheted off trees like a scold. He hoped Eugene across the way would hear it, and he did. A porch light blinked on like an eye. A dog barked. Cole stopped. His patience was a small animal, and it had gotten loose. Enough of this, he said, and stepped toward the porch. Lucas didn't wait for the bat to become a story. He moved sideways, so the porch post was between them, and spoke in a voice that tried to make the night believe him. Your boy is going to think about this later, he said to Cole. He's going to think about his mother or his brother or somebody else he promised he'd never do this to, and you're going to be the man in that story who didn't stop. You want that? Cole's answer was a shape in the dark. Came up the step with a boot that had seen too many bars. And then an absurd thing happened. Ms. Cabrera's angel coyotes, 3 of them, moved through the yard like shadows with eyes. They weren't attacking, they were curious, their heads low, their bodies slender and sharp. Dax yelped before he could stop himself. Animals don't care about logos. They care about smells and intent. Go on, Lucas shouted at them, clapping his hands once. They scattered, tails straight, but the interruption had shifted something. Dax had seen his own fear. Cole had seen Dax's. A light across the way flared, someone's cell phone flashlight trying to turn the woods into a room. You boys all right over there? Eugene's voice came thin and far. I'm calling Alton. Dax swore again. Cole looked at Lucas like a man making change in his head and realizing he'd miscounted. He lowered the bat an inch. I didn't want to break your house, he said. There's too much paperwork. The line was thrown like a bone, as if he didn't know whether he meant it as a threat or a joke. You don't fix anything with breaking, Lucas said. Somebody should have taught you that when you were 5. Cole blew air through his nose. The bat tipped. He gestured at the darkness with a jerk of his chin, and they retreated, aggressive even in their leaving. The woods swallowed them the way the diner door had swallowed Iris, a moment before out of the story, still inside it. Lucas stood on the porch until he could no longer hear boots on dirt. He counted 30. Then he turned the knob on the pantry door. Willa was in Iris's lap, her head under Iris's chin, both of them folded into the shape humans make around other humans when terrible things are near, an instinct like birds knowing when to go. Are they gone? Willa whispered. For now, Lucas said. Eugene turned his porch light on. That scared them more than the coyotes. You're not scared of anything, Willa said to him, as if she could make it true. I'm scared of a lot of things, Lucas said. I just don't let them drive. Who drives? She asked. He put a hand on her hair. We do, he said, together. For the morning after the next day they didn't sleep exactly. They arranged themselves in a way the body mistakes for sleep when it's asking for courage. Dawn crept in with second chances. Lucas made pancakes because bravery burns more sugar than fear. Willa buttered hers with concentration, something like a benediction. Iris ate slowly, a person reacquainting herself with the act of being present. What happens now? Iris asked. Her voice was less haunted, more filled with the ordinary uncertainty of regular people making weekday choices. Now, Lucas said, we go back like the world is normal. That's the trick all grown-ups know. But we do it with a plan. We stick together. We ask for help from the right people. Are there right people? Iris asked. There are, Lucas said, and sometimes they're people who don't look right until you do the math. He called Alton from the porch, told him not everything that had happened and enough of what had. Alton whistled low when he heard Greyline mentioned and sighed like a tire losing air when Lucas said Iris had proof. You are choosing the scenic route, he said, but it might actually be the road that gets you out alive. They drove back into town with the sun sharpening all the edges. Iris kept the drive in her boot. Willa kept her notebook open to a page where she'd drawn a fort with a door labeled for friends. They arrived to find 3 patrol cars parked outside the shop and 1 Greyline truck idling across the street. It looked like the first day of a parade no one wants. Alton raised a palm at Lucas. He looked tired in the way men do when they've had to decide something tired them. Got your message, he said. He glanced at Iris. Ma'am, Iris nodded. She had the posture of someone who went to bed the night before a test and woke to find the test had changed languages. We're going to take your statement, Alton said, and then I'm going to walk with you to the diner. The diner? Lucas asked. Alton's mouth tugged. You think napkin holders don't have cameras these days, he said. Gus takes pride in knowing who steals the sweetener. His cameras got you standing up in his establishment like some kind of poster, and the two goons pretending to be citizens. It's not the whole war, it's a decent skirmish. The Greyline truck revved as if it had executive patience. Dax leaned on the hood in a way that tried to say unconcerned and said, I can't help myself. Cole was not visible. Maybe he'd decided not being seen makes a man bigger. I made a choice last night, Iris said as they walked toward the diner with a protective bubble of patrol cars at the edges. Not to run. Lucas smiled without showing his teeth. Welcome to the club whose dues are your breath, he said. Inside Marigold, light climbed over the chrome like hope. Me clapped her hands when she saw them. Someone at the corner booth stood and applauded. It was ridiculous and perfect. Willa blushed at the attention and hid behind a syrup bottle. Gus in his grease-stained apron broke into a grin. I've been waiting for a good day for 2 weeks, he said. Looks like it's here. Alton nodded at the rodent-like camera up by the pie case. Run it, he said. They watched, Lucas leaving the booth, becoming an arrow. Iris pressed against the counter, her hand on a napkin holder that later would become a minor city jury's favorite plot twist. Cole with his bat in another timeline. Dax leaning forward as if gossip were air. The staff's face is a study in human calculus, fear plus empathy, divided by risk. They watched Lucas catch the hard wrist of a man who believed his wrist was the hardest thing in the room. They watched Willa peek from behind the counter, a small moon in an eclipse. You a boxer? Alton asked, pausing the footage like it was a football game and he discovered a new play. Lucas shrugged. Just a dad, he said. People laughed and maybe they believed him. That was fine. Iris watched herself in the corner of the frame, how small she'd made herself, how little space she'd permitted to belong to her. She felt something like anger rise, but it wasn't at the men this time. It was at the version of herself who had thought being small would protect her. She did not hate that woman. She wanted to take her by the hand and walk her outside. Outside, the Greyline truck had slunk away, as if smugness had a shift change. Alton looked 10% less like a man bracing for an apology he didn't owe anyone. He led them next door to a lawyer whose office had always smelled like coffee and old paper. She's decent, he said, and she bites men who need biting. They sat at a small table. The lawyer, Ms. Devine, looked Iris in the eye as if she were calibrating something and then nodded. We're going to make this matter, she said. Iris nodded back. I needed someone else to say it, she admitted. We say it, then we do it, Ms. Devine said. You'll both have to say yes to being visible. Lucas glanced at his daughter, who was practicing making her straw wrapper into a snake. We can do visible, he said. In truth, his stomach made a sound like a boat hitting a submerged log. He had navigated his life by staying in the quiet channels. This river wanted something else. There were statements, there were texts, there was coffee. Ms. Devine forwarded the drive to a journalist who had a bigger platform and a smaller tolerance for being lied to. Alton made the kind of call that told Lucas he had made a decision about what kind of sheriff he wanted to be in his own obituary. And then there was nothing but time, the way a theater fills up with audience members, breath as the curtain trembles but will not rise faster. Iris stared at the space whale sticker on her thumbnail. When does it happen? She asked. When you're most bored, Ms. Devine said. That's when change stumbles in, when you've given up chewing your nails. Iris half smiled. Wonderful. They left by the back alley to avoid becoming the world's content. Back there, between dumpsters and graffiti that read "Be kind or else," Dax was waiting. He looked like a person who had been assigned the wrong homework and had decided to improvise. I'm not here to threaten you, he said, holding up both hands. He glanced at Willa and something like shame crossed his face and didn't leave. I came to say, the files you send won't matter if Cole goes to the room tonight and deletes the personal logs. That's where the names are. You want it to matter, you gotta get that too. Lucas put his body half a step in front of Iris without thinking. Why tell us this? He asked. Dax licked his lower lip, the way people do when they are about to leave a role. I watched my sister cry in the bathroom after she found bruises and didn't have a story. I always thought power was when people did what you said. She made me realize it's when you do what you can live with. You could tell the sheriff, Iris said. You could be the one. He shook his head once quick. Cole would turn my life into a ladder rung. I'm not that brave yet. He pointed at the east side of town with his chin. Greyline's data room, building C. He'll be there after 9. And if we go there. Lucas asked. Dax's laugh was the bitter kind, the kind a person takes sips of when they have no water. You're not going to do anything stupid, he said, because you have a kid. He pointed at Iris's boot. And because you're not the kind of people who believe movies are the same as life. Tell us why you're telling us then, Lucas pressed. Dax didn't answer. He looked at Willa. Your whale's cool, he said. I used to draw spaceships. Whales are sort of like spaceships, Willa said, with the certainty of 7. For fish. Something snapped inside Dax's expression, then softened. He walked away, the kind of man who might be making a different choice tomorrow. They're not going there, Iris said. We're not going there. We are not, Lucas agreed. He put his hand on his daughter's head. He imagined the data room, imagined the bat, imagined the cold fluorescence of that place where other people's secrets were collated and stored. He imagined men who had never made pancakes deciding whether or not his life needed a new shape. No, that night the reporter published. Ms. Devine had sent him the drive. He published names, dates, invoices disguised as something else, letters that made ignoring impossible. He did not publish Iris's face. He did publish a still of a hand on a napkin holder, anonymous, delicate. The story leaped from screen to screen. It made phones buzz in pockets. It made people ask each other in grocery lines. Did you see? Did you know it could be that simple to hide something so big? Greyline issued a statement written in a voice designed to sound like gravitas. Allegations, it said. Ongoing investigation, it said. The sheriff's office shared it without commentary, a move that made half the town call their cousins. At 10 that night, after Willa was asleep in the cabin bed with the quilt tucked up to her ear, after Lucas had flipped his phone face down 3 times and picked it up 4, Iris stood on the porch and cried. Not because she was still afraid, she was, but because she had given something away that she had been carrying too long, and the body cries for all sorts of reasons. Lucas stepped out and stood next to her. They didn't touch. That would have been too much and not enough. Coyotes talked to each other somewhere. A bat traced a shape in the air. When I was little, Iris said to the dark, I thought adults knew, that every person older than me had read a book I hadn't gotten to yet, and in it were all the instructions. Lucas rubbed his jaw, the letter of his knuckles a small map. Turns out it's just a lot of improvisation, he said, and then you die. She laughed through the remnants of tears, a sound like someone finding a key in the frost. Comforting. He thought of his wife for a long moment, and of how love sometimes asks you for a second act you didn't know you were auditioning for. He looked at Iris and let the feeling of her presence be an actual presence, not a ghost. Thank you, she said, for letting me be here. It would have been worse without anyone knowing my name. What is your middle name? Willa's small voice floated from the doorway, wedge of light spilt on the porch floor. She had the sleepy logic of children who wake to life mid-sentence. Iris turned, wiped her face with her sleeve. June, she said. Iris June Vale. That's a good one, Willa said, entirely serious. I'm Willa Me Hart. Daddy says my middle name is a Southern inheritance. I think middle names are just secret names adults use when they want you to be brave. Iris bent and kissed Willa's hair. It was the most natural thing she had done in days. 5. The shape of after weeks would pass and the story would not end. Stories like these don't end. They settle into a series of choices. Greyline would fire 3 men and declare the problem solved. The state would convene a committee, and the committee would produce a report, and the report would be thorough and late. Dax would leave town for a while and come back and start working at the bait shop, where he would be surprisingly tender when he showed kids how to hold a worm. Cole would get arrested for something less than what he'd done and serve a sentence that would teach him nothing he wanted to learn. He would watch the sky through wires and blame it. Ms. Devine would give a quote to the paper. Alton would get re-elected by a margin that made the town shake their heads and say, well, he did one thing right. Me would keep an extra pie on the back counter for policemen she didn't fully trust because she believed in the small economy of kindness. Iris would find a place to live above the old bookstore with the cat you had to step over to get to the cookbooks. She would buy second-hand plates. She would take the space whale and pin it to the baseboard in the kitchen like a house blessing. Lucas would build a cradle for a client and remember to breathe while he fitted the slats. Willa would draw an albatross that looked like a paper plane. They would go to the cabin and not be interrupted by coyotes or men, only by rain. On a Tuesday, he would call Iris and ask if she needed anything from the store, and she would say no, and then call back 5 minutes later and say, "Actually, do you have any of that lemon oil?" And he would drive it over and forget the oil but remember to bring pancakes for dinner. One day, when the worst of the noise had cooled to a dull roar you could ignore while you did the dishes, Iris would stand at the counter in Marigold Diner with 2 napkin holders in either hand. She would press a sticker to the underside of one, a little space whale worn at one fin, its galaxy lightened by washing and time. She would laugh. Me would look at her and shake her head and say, "You're one for the book." "Which one?" Iris would ask. "The one we keep behind the pie case where we write down the names of people who made this place better and didn't ask to see the list," Me would say. Then a boy would walk in with a hoodie and a nervous mouth and ask Iris for directions. She would point him to the library without thinking. He would thank her too loudly. She would finish her coffee and leave a tip that made Gus glance at her like she'd made a mistake. She would feel the light on her back as she pushed open the door and think, "There is before and there is after, and we're in after now, aren't we?" And once, months later, when the town had gotten used to the fact that the woman with the green coat really did live here, Willa would ask the question again, because life would present a smaller version. An old man at the bus stop, shivering in the wind, bus late, no hat. Willa would tug Lucas's sleeve the way she had before, the way he would always be grateful for. "Daddy," she'd say, in a voice that was still 7 and also 8 and a little bit always, "can we help him?" Lucas would smile and hand the old man his own hat and feel that old feeling, fear, readiness, love rise like warm water around his ribs. He would look at Iris across the street, her hand raised in hello, her smile cautious and true. He would think, yes, the answer to this question is always yes, even when yes is hard, even when yes is not exactly what we had planned. We can help. We can hold the wrist that wants to grab, we can lock the pantry door, we can walk someone to a diner and watch their hands shake and speak their name when they forget it. We can keep going. He would cross to Iris. She would tuck a strand of hair behind her ear and say, "There's this thing at the library next week on data privacy. You'll come. Always wanted to know how to hide a napkin holder," he'd say, and she'd laugh. They'd stand there for a minute, the air full of the kind of peace that doesn't deny the existence of trouble, just refuses to be entirely defined by it. And that would be the shape of it, not a movie, not a perfect arc, but a life. 2 people who had walked into a diner one day when there were other options. A father who'd learned how to hold 2 worlds in one pair of hands without dropping either. A child who would grow up with a catalog of moments where the answer was yes, and it led merely to the next moment, and that was, it turns out, enough. Years from now, when Marigold's red vinyl had been replaced, but the graffiti in the alley still read "Be kind or else," when iron-on patches came back into style, when Alton grew old enough to tell stories about the night coyotes broke up a fight, Lucas would sit on the cabin porch with Willa Toller and Iris unafraid of the dark. They would watch a bat at dusk trace its language in the air. Willa would say she'd decided to study whales, space optional. Iris would say that space was always an option. Lucas would think of his wife and feel love like water, present everywhere, hard to hold, necessary. He would think of a woman in a green coat who had walked into a diner and not looked anyone in the eye because she thought she didn't deserve the gaze, and he would marvel at how many gazes she commands now, how gently she holds them. He would not forget the worst parts. We do not. He would not pretend the bat hadn't existed or that the men had not chosen. But he would choose, again, to live in the part of the story where the porch light comes on across the way and someone says, "I'm calling Alton," and angels who are actually coyotes drift through the yard like myths with paws. He would tuck his daughter into bed and hear her ask in a voice still believing in everything, "Daddy, can we help her?" About a girl in a book with a bruise beneath her hair, and he would kiss her forehead and say, "We can help her. A story helps, a hand helps, holding matters, names matter." And if the next day someone asks him why he did it, why he stood up in a diner where people had learned the art of looking away, he won't say he's a hero. He'll say he doesn't like pancakes cold. He'll say his daughter reached for his sleeve. He'll say a woman's hand shook and he remembered a hand he loved that shook too once. He'll say that sometimes the world asks you something and the answer you give is the person you get to be for the rest of your life. he'll say yes.